Imagine your government hands you a set of keys. An apartment, yours, no mortgage, no down payment, a rent so small you'd almost forget to pay it. For free. For life? This isn't a daydream. For about 70 years, this was real. For nearly 290 million people. The Soviet Union didn't sell you a home. It gave you one. Housing wasn't a bill, it was a right. It sounds like the most generous deal in human history. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. It still cost them everything, just not in money. So the real question isn't whether the Soviets made housing free. They did. The question is the one in the back of your mind right now. Could anyone actually do this? Could it work for you today? Let's run the real numbers. Start with the deal itself because it was real. In the Soviet Union, you did not buy your apartment. The state owned it, the state built it, and then the state handed it to you. You paid rent, technically, but the rent was frozen back in 1928 and barely moved for the next 60 years. By the 1980s, rent and utilities together ate up as little as 3 to 5% of a family's income. A few percent for everything: the roof, the heat, the water. Compare that to the same decade in the West, where a family could spend 30, 40, even 50% of their income just to keep a roof overhead. On paper, this is the best housing deal ever offered to ordinary people. No landlord, no mortgage, no eviction for missing a payment. So why isn't every country copying it right now? Because free is the most expensive word in economics. Nothing is actually free. A building costs land. It costs steel and concrete. It costs the labor of thousands of people. That cost does not vanish when you stop charging for it. It just changes shape. And it changes who pays. The Soviets didn't delete the cost of housing. They hid it. And to understand where they hid it, you have to follow the money that never showed up. Here's why you don't know about that free apartment. You paid for it every single month. In a paycheck you never received. Think about how a normal economy works. You do a job. The work creates value. You get paid for that value, and you decide what to do with the money, including paying for a place to live. The Soviet system broke that chain on purpose. The state owned the factories, the farms, the shops, the buildings, everything. So before a single wage was paid, the state took the surplus straight off the top. A skilled engineer might take home 150 rubles a month, while the real value of what an average worker produced was several times higher. The gap didn't disappear. The state kept it and spent it for you. Some of it came back as housing, some as healthcare, some as cheap bread. Economists have a name for this. They call it the social wage, money you earned but never touched, handed back to you as things instead of cash. So the apartment was never a gift. It was a deduction. The rent wasn't a few percent of your income. The real rent was the entire paycheck you never got to see. And here's the brutal part. By some critics' math, the money quietly skimmed from one worker's lifetime of wages could have bought several apartments outright. Meanwhile, millions waited their whole lives and got nothing. It gets stranger. That same hidden surplus, the gap between what you made and what you were paid, didn't only build your apartment. It also bankrolled allied governments thousands of miles away, from Havana to Hanoi to Angola. Part of the paycheck you never saw was quietly funding someone else's revolution. And there was a second problem, bigger than the first. When something has no price, there's no simple way to decide who gets it. In a market, price does that job, quietly, automatically. Remove the price, and you have to ration housing some other way. So the Soviets did, with waiting lists, with your workplace, with an internal permit, the propiska, that tied you to one city, and with connections, favors, the right bottle of imported cognac to the right official. The price tag was gone, but a different price quietly took its place, and that price was brutal. Let's add up what people actually paid, not in rubles, in the things that don't show up on a receipt. First time, the waiting lists were not weeks or months, they were years, often 10, sometimes 15 or 20. A young couple could put their name down for an apartment and finally get the keys when their children were nearly grown. Some families were still standing in line when the Soviet Union itself collapsed. You didn't pay a mortgage for 30 years. You paid with a decade of your life, waiting before you ever moved in. Second, space. The most common Soviet apartment was the khrushchyovka. A one-room flat ran about 30 square meters for an entire family. A two-room version, around 45. The kitchen was 5 or 6 square meters. The ceilings barely cleared 2.5 meters. The staircases were built just wide enough to carry a coffin down and not much wider. The official sanitary target was about 9 square meters per person. Sometimes people got less. And while you waited for even that, millions lived in the communal apartment. Multiple families, one kitchen, one bathroom. Strangers sharing a single stove for years, sometimes decades. Third, and this one is invisible until it's gone, freedom. Your home was tied to your job and your permit. Lose the job, anger the wrong official, and the roof over your head was suddenly negotiable. When the state owns your home, it also owns your exit. You don't quit, you don't move, you don't make noise. Here's a clean way to say it. In a market, money buys your home, and the home is yours. In the Soviet model, obedience rented your home, and the lease could always be revoked. Now people are clever, and the market always finds a crack. You couldn't legally sell your apartment, so instead people swapped them. My flat for yours, with a little extra cash slipped across the table in an envelope. A whole shadow profession of fixers appeared just to arrange the trades. Ban the price and it doesn't vanish. It just goes underground. And then there's the part that's still happening today. These buildings were designed to last about 25 years. The plan was almost charming. By the time they crumbled, full communism would have arrived to replace them with something better. Communism was officially promised by 1980. It never arrived. The buildings did not get the memo. 60 years later, millions still live in them, in crumbling concrete blocks, still paying the maintenance bill on free housing that was supposed to be temporary. That's the quiet lesson for the whole planet. Cheap mass housing without a real price tends to rot, because nothing ever tells the system when to tear it down and start again. The free apartment of one generation becomes the falling apart apartment of the next. If it costs this much, why build the whole system this way? 3 reasons. The first was the poster. Free housing was propaganda. Proof on a billboard that the system could do something its rivals wouldn't. There was even a glossy film made in 1959 showing a happy family floating into a bright new apartment. Scientists on screen earnestly explained how they'd redesigned the kitchen so a housewife would take fewer steps to make borscht. What the film never showed was the overcrowded communal flat that family was escaping, or the 20 years on a factory line it took to earn the keys. The image won the argument anyway. The second was control. A home tied to a job and a permit is a leash you don't notice you're wearing. It put workers where the state needed them and made disobedience expensive. You think twice about stepping out of line when your address depends on staying in it. The third was cold economic logic. A poor, war-torn country wanted to industrialize fast. The fastest way was to pay people little, keep the surplus, and pour it into factories and steel, handing back just enough in housing and bread to keep everyone going. Free housing wasn't generosity, it was a strategy. Now the question from the title. Strip away the history, and it comes down to one hard rule. Housing costs something real, always, so someone always pays. The only choice an economy ever has is who pays and how. There are basically 3 ways to settle the bill. 1. Price. The market way. You pay money. In return you get choice, quality, and the freedom to leave whenever you want. The bill is large and it's right there in front of you. 2. Taxes. The modern social housing way. The government subsidizes the rent and taxpayers cover the gap. It's cheaper for the tenant, but it is not free, and there are still waiting lists because demand for cheap housing never ends. 3. Suppressed wages and lost freedom. The Soviet way, you pay almost nothing in cash and instead pay with time, with space, with mobility, with choice. Notice what never happens on that list. The cost never reaches zero. Free doesn't erase the bill, it just hides it and changes the line you stand in. Price rations with money, free rations with time, quality, and connections. Now let's be fair because this matters. The Soviet system was not a scam. Tens of millions of people who would otherwise have had nothing got a real separate apartment. No mortgage, no bank that could throw them out for one missed payment. Heat and hot water piped in some of the harshest winters on earth. For a family crawling out of a barracks, that was not nothing. It was everything, but it was paid for. In a paycheck they never saw, and a freedom they were never allowed to price. And we have living proof that you can get close to cheap, but never to free. Look at Vienna. Around 6 in 10 residents live in social or subsidized housing, and it is genuinely affordable, but it isn't free. It's funded by a dedicated tax and by the rents tenants still pay, built up patiently over 100 years. Look at Singapore. About 8 in 10 people live in public housing, but they buy it on a 99-year lease, using savings the government forces them to set aside from every paycheck. Both are huge successes. Neither is free. They prove the real lesson of the Soviet experiment. You can make housing cheap. You cannot make it free. Because the moment you push the price all the way to zero, the cost doesn't disappear. It erupts somewhere else. In 10 years on a waiting list, in a 30 square meter life, in a freedom you traded away without ever seeing the receipt. So, back to those keys. Yes, a government could hand them to you tomorrow. The apartment would be real. The relief of never paying rent would be real, and the bill would still arrive. Just not in your mailbox. It would arrive in the paycheck you never see, in the years you spent waiting, in the choices you quietly give up. That's the thing about free housing. It isn't free. It's just a bill written in a currency you don't notice until it's already been spent. The Soviets ran the experiment for 70 years across a continent with nearly 300 million people. And the result is the clearest answer economics ever gave us. The price of a home can be hidden, moved, or disguised. It can never be erased. If this changed how you see the word free, subscribe. Because almost everything the world hands you for free is really just a bill you haven't found yet. And next time, we're going to go find another one.